The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of NSTV or its affiliates. NSTV provides a platform for community expression in accordance with FCC guidelines and local access policies. Content is reviewed for compliance but not editorialized.
Free speech is the foundation, the cornerstone of democracy. Tells the government, hands off our religion, our ideas, our ability to speak. But other people have rights too, and when rights collide, the government must balance those rights.
We'll have two presentations, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So first we'll hear all about the First Amendment and what's left of it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming out, and thanks to Zoe for putting this together and the staff here. What a beautiful room, and thanks for coming out on such a cold, windy evening. I teach First Amendment law at Suffolk University Law School. I've done so for the past 26 years. And the name of my class is First Amendment Law, Defamation, Privacy, Right to Know. And we're going to touch on each of those subjects a little bit. I'd planned on speaking for about an hour and a half, but the moderator says I get 20 minutes, so I'm going to have to blow through some of my slides with rapidity. I start all my presentations with this slide, and I'm wondering if in the back row you can read everything on there? No, doesn't matter. This is the U.S. Constitution. There's only 4 words that I think are critically important for presentations like this and for us U.S. citizens. Can you all read the 4 words? Wait a minute. That's just 3. We the people, done. That's all you need to know about the U.S. Constitution. We, the people, are the government. We own it. We own that White House. Didn't have much to say about that East Wing going down, but we own the State House and the City Hall, etc. I hate it when technology lets me down. Here we go. Yeah, old school. So I told you my class is called Media Law, First Amendment Law, Defamation, Privacy, Right to Know. I sometimes call it the 5 freedoms. These are the 5 freedoms highlighted in yellow that the First Amendment guarantees to all U.S. citizens and all persons in the United States, despite what's going on these days around the country. Religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. We're just going to get to talk about speech and press this evening due to time constraints. Excuse me. I am the president of an organization called NEFAC, the New England First Amendment Coalition. We educate, advocate, and litigate First Amendment issues and the right of the people to know what the government is up to, most importantly. So defamation, I'm going to have to be quick. Those of you who know what defamation is, libel and slander, it's when you injure someone's reputation by making a false statement, publishing a false statement. And when I say publishing, we publish when we speak, when we write, when we type. So can anyone, I know that's also hard to read, starts with the First Amendment, but if you can find anything in there about protection of reputation, I'd be interested in you telling me about it, because I'm all about free speech. My buddy was running for mayor, and the incumbent mayor is a very nice woman, but I wanted my friend to win, so I took out a big ad in the paper right before the election. I said, don't vote for the incumbent mayor. She's a child molester. Don't vote for her. Well, I found out that she had the right to sue me for this defamation thing. I said, what about my free speech? And as we're going to see, it's not always free. Judges and juries can award damages. So where do we get this right to enjoy a good reputation? Because it's not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Constitution. And I will tell you, it comes from an ancient body of law. Anybody tell me what that ancient body of law is, where we get the right to enjoy a good reputation here in the United States today? Magna Carta, common law, very good guesses. They're wrong, but they're good. Ancient body of law. Oh, Code of Hammurabi? Another good guess. But wrong. Nope. Well, it's the Ten Commandments. And the 8th commandment says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. From that ancient body of law that God Almighty wrote on stones of tablet and gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, we get the law of defamation in the United States today. Free speech is the foundation, the cornerstone of democracy. Tells the government, hands off our religion, our ideas, our ability to speak. But other people have rights too, and when rights collide, the government must balance those rights and come to a conclusion. That train on the left is 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. The one on the right is other governmental and societal interests that sometimes crash and clash head-on with our free speech rights and free press. Anybody know what some of those governmental or societal interests might be that would shut us up?
Personal harm.
Who said security? That's a good one. National security. Health. Education. We talked about protection of reputation already. Privacy is a big one, which I'll try to hit a bit. I wrote a book, Gone to the Wind. I can't get it published. Some lady already wrote about the Civil War. Time, place, and manner are the big ones. I'm against all war. And I like my protest to be seen, so I have this giant sign. And I go out in the middle of Route 93, Route 3, we used to call it the Southeast Expressway, with a big sign that says, say no to war. And I'm in the middle lane Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and police come and drag me away. It's called a time, place, and manner restriction, which they can impose as long as it's, what's that word?
Reasonable.
Who said that? That word underlies all law. Reasonableness. Correct. Time, place, and manner. They tell me I can go on the Boston Common from morning till night with my sign and my megaphone, but not on the highway. So we don't think about this often, but there are classes of speech, some which get tremendous First Amendment protection and others get none. And in descending order, these are the classes of speech that the Supreme Court deals with. The bottom 2, defamation, obscenity, get no protection from the First Amendment. The top 5 get extreme protection. Commercial speech, not so much. Indecent speech, not so much. The government can regulate commercial and indecent speech. How many people are familiar with the works of George Carlin, the comedian? He had a monologue in New York City one Saturday afternoon, which was broadcast on the radio. It was called The 7 Dirty Words You Can't Say on Television. And the theater who put on that program and Carlin were both cited by the FCC. And what they said was, you can have that broadcast at 10 p.m., not at 2 p.m. Reasonable time, place, and manner restriction to protect children. Jefferson, if I had to pick between newspapers and the government, I'd pick the newspapers, he said. And when we limit freedom of the press, we lose it. Frederick Douglass, liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts and opinions have ceased to exist. It's the dread of tyrants. It's the right which they first of all strike down. They know its power. If there is, Texas v. Johnson was the case where Mr. Johnson burnt the American flag outside the Republic National Convention in Dallas in 1984. It took 5 years. He was convicted of both a federal and a state crime for burning the American flag. The Supreme Court said, the government may not shut us up just because the majority of folks find what we're saying to be offensive or disagreeable. We have the right to offend. The Supreme Court has said, above all else, the First Amendment means the government has no power to restrict expression because of its messages, its ideas, its subject matter, or its content. That was the Supreme Court of New Hampshire, quoting the Supreme Court of the United States. But First Amendment doesn't protect all speech, we've learned. Incitement to imminent lawless action. By the way, I'm a little short of change. If somebody at the break could go out and maybe make pretend you have a gun and rob the... No, my advocacy is not eloquent enough to incite imminent lawless action. Harassment, each state has laws what harassment is and is not. True threats, threats to commit a crime is a crime. Has to be a true threat, though. Defamation, we've talked about. Obscenity, we've talked about. Fighting words, I don't like this one. To me, that's contrary to what we've already heard the Supreme Court say, that we do have the right to offend. When I was a kid, if you said, your mother wears combat boots, you were in a fight right off the bat. Then women started wearing combat boots, so that's not the same anymore. Perjury, conspiracy, and fraud. First Amendment does not protect these forms of speech or press.
So what are fighting words? What's that mean? What's that supposed to mean?
It was in 1942 when Mr. Chaplinsky was walking down the sidewalk in New Hampshire, and there was a constable coming the other way, and they sort of tried to get out of each other's way, and the cop said to Chaplinsky, get out of the way, and Chaplinsky said, no, you're nothing but a goddamn fascist and a racketeer. Funny, but he was sentenced to 2 years in the state prison of New Hampshire for that speech. And his lawyers took the case all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, and you'll note the date, 1942. We all know what was happening.
Great year to be born.
I'm with you. But it was not a great year for free speech. And generally, you'll see, for example, in the late 60s, when we were involved in the Vietnam conflict, speech was attempted to be restricted by the government. But anyway, in 1942, the Supreme Court took the First Amendment and threw it out the window, as far as I'm concerned. They said there are classes of speech which we can ban, no problem, lewd and obscene. Obscene is specifically defined by the Supreme Court. Lewd, I don't know what that means. Profane, I don't know what that means anymore. When I was a kid, I was taking the name of the Lord in vain. You can tell I went to Catholic school from first grade through college. But now I don't think anybody knows what profanity really is. Libelous, we've talked about, and the fighting words has not been dealt with by the Supreme Court since 1942. Nowadays, the government cannot shut us up unless, and even if we're advocating for the use of force or to violate the law, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. 1969. These are the fellows that were involved in that case. Some of you may know that the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois, a predominantly Jewish community where a lot of Holocaust survivors had settled. And the Supreme Court of the United States said, yes, you Nazis can march. And the KKK can have a rally in Roxbury, Massachusetts. The police have to protect the Nazis and the racists. I gave this presentation once at a high school in New Hampshire, and I got a call the next day from the principal. He said he got calls from parents who wanted to know why he invited a racist Nazi speaker. I think they got lost in translation maybe on the way home from the kids. So this is important. We can demean others based on race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other ground, and it's hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech is that we protect the freedom to express the thought we hate. A lot of people think hate speech is against the law. It is not. Hate crimes are, hate speech is not. I hate people that think it's against the law. I call my class, where do you draw the line? These poor kids are no doubt children of people who belong to the Westboro Baptist Church. That church teaches that our service people have been killed in wars because we tolerate homosexuality. And what they would do, they would go to the burial services in the cemeteries of soldiers who were being interred with their families, and they would scream these hateful things. And one of the parents of a child who was being buried brought the case to the Supreme Court of the United States, and ultimately the Westboro Baptist people had to stay 1,000 feet away from the grave sites. It's called a buffer zone. So this is the Massachusetts Constitution, and it's what we're here to talk about. Free press is essential to our freedom. It must not be restrained. The right to free speech shall not be abridged. If you get a chance, look at the New Hampshire Constitution. It's even stronger than this or the First Amendment. This is a great saying that I'll take credit for. And it's, to me, critical. The rights to free speech and free press are eviscerated, absent a corresponding right to know what the government is up to. I made this up, and I tried to come up with another word besides eviscerated, because I hate to use big fancy words. But when I looked it up, it said, basically, rip the guts out. And I said, all right, I'll stick with eviscerated. We had a case in Massachusetts last year. There was a prostitution ring, and not only did they arrest the people who were running the ring and the prostitutes, but they took charges out against, I think it was 39 Johns, people who visited these prostitution places. And normally a clerk's hearing in Massachusetts is private. The Supreme Court of Mass has ruled that they don't have to be public, unlike a criminal trial, which does. But in this case, it says trustees of Boston University. It was really WBUR who brought the case against the clerk, and the clerk ruled that these show cause hearings were going to be public because she wanted to show that, and in fact, the people, they had issued a press release, the federal government, saying the people who were charged were professors and lawyers and politicians, elected officials, and for that reason, those hearings are going to be held in public. They have not happened yet, I don't believe. Not sure why I put that there. There was an issue about misinformation and disinformation. I speak sometimes to newsrooms, newspapers and broadcast stations, and I tell them, check your facts, double check, triple check your facts. As I said, without the right to know what the government is up to, free speech and free press lose a lot of their punch. This is the Massachusetts general law, and because I'm limited to 20 minutes, you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to click through these slides with rapidity, but at the end, my email address will be up there, and you can email me with any thoughts, questions you might have, or you might invite me to your home to give one of these. So we have the right to public records, and they have to respond within 10 days, and they have to tell you if they're not going to give it to you, that they got your request, and they're going to say they're not within our possession, and they have to tell you where you might be able to get them. What are public records? Boom. This is Mass General Laws, Chapter 4, Section 7, Paragraph 26, and you can look it up, and it tells you basically anything that comes into the hands of a government official. It has to do with the furtherance of their governmental function. We own them. These are public records. We, the people, have a right to the records. Except for this area of the law is all about the exemptions. What can we get? What can we not get? Some of them are perfect common sense, and others we litigate all the time. Makes sense. I go into a police station in New Hampshire and I say, Chief, I heard there was a murder in town last night. I want you to get out every record of the investigation. I want to know who the witnesses are, who's been interviewed. And as I'm saying that, they drag me out the front door. They have the right to conduct their investigation without my input. Huge word to remember. I call it redaction. If you ask for governmental records and they tell you there's private information in there, say, fine, redact what's private, give me the rest. I've made requests from the FBI and I get black sheets of paper. I say, couldn't you give me like the of and the somewhere, you know? By the way, I tell my students, take note of this, rcfp.org. There you will learn everything you need to know about our right to know what the government is up to. They have a guide on all 50 states and on the federal FOIA law. Tremendous resource. Real quick, because my point here is that society's mores and values change over time. This woman was an Olympic swimmer from Australia and a long-distance swimmer. She was a tremendous athlete. But she came to Revere Beach in 1907 wearing this skimpy bathing suit, as you can see, and was arrested and prosecuted for indecent exposure. But times change. In the 1930s, your bathing suit was okay as long as it wasn't so many inches away from your kneecap. I'm from a place called Wollaston Beach, and nowadays men don't have to wear tops. But in 1939, they did, before even my time. Nowadays, this is Lady Gaga. She's the world's leading practitioner of breast pyrotechnics. And if she did this show in Revere in 1907, I think she would have been in a lot of trouble. Unfortunately, both England and Canada don't have the First Amendment, and they are arresting people for doing things like insulting. And this is a terrible true story. This fellow got 2 years in prison for posting offensive stickers. And his sticker said, "We will be a minority in our homeland by 2066. 2 years in jail in England. Wouldn't happen in the United States, thank God for the First Amendment. I am pretty much ready to shut up, even though I don't want to. But out of deference to Chris, oh, this is a great one though. My assistant puts these together for me. There it is. I counsel newspapers and they write a story that accuses someone of a crime. And of course I ask them if you have proof, and they say no, but it was in the Washington Times, the LA Times rather. I say, I don't care where it was, either you know it to be true or you're not publishing it, because someone who repeats or republishes defamatory matter is subject to be liable, L-I-A-B-L-E for libel, L-I-B-E-L. As if they had originally published it. And remember, publishing is speaking as well as writing.
Can I ask, on social media, how does that affect people who repost
Well,
offensive things that other people have posted?
we have the right to offend in the United States. If it's defamatory, the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever they call them now, Snapchat, all those, they have a safe harbor. They are Chapter 230 of the Communications Decency Act. As long as they're not editing what they're posting, they're safe. But the people who published it, if someone can get their identity, and usually they can if it's defamatory, just as liable as the original publisher.
What about the person who reposts, not the platform itself, but the person, the other social media user who reposts or?
Same thing, same thing. The republisher is just as liable as the original publisher. So you gotta be careful what you say. Long story about the Bose radio that I won't bother to tell you. Real quick, I'm gonna do the rights of privacy. Press is overstepping in every direction the obvious bounds of decency. Gossip is no longer the resource of the idle and the vicious, but has become a trade. He's talking about newspapers. These instantaneous photographs and newspaper enterprises have invaded the sacred precincts of private and domestic life. These new mechanical devices threaten to make good the prediction that what is whispered in the closet shall be proclaimed from the housetops. Anybody know what year that was published?
Early 1800s?
No, the late 1800s, 1890. This fellow Brandeis, they named a school after him, and he became a Supreme Court justice. I'm going to be a couple minutes. How far is too far when covering the news? There's only 4 kinds of invasion of privacy recognized by the law. Some of them, like intrusion, are very simple. False light is more complicated. That's Warren Spahn. How many people know who Warren Spahn was? Some, but not all. Those of you who don't know, have you heard of Roger Clemens or Randy Johnson or Pedro Martinez? Well, Warren Spahn was all those rolled into one in the late 30s. Played for a team called the Boston Braves, which moved to Milwaukee. Now they're in Atlanta. Exactly. But he quit baseball to join the Army during World War II, fought in Belgium, was wounded, came back, started pitching again, won the Cy Young Award again, best pitcher in baseball. So somebody thought that would make a great book, and they wrote a book about him, and they said he was shot in Belgium, taken away on a stretcher in an ambulance. Didn't happen. False light, invasion of privacy. Defamation has to injure the reputation. False light, invasion of privacy can enhance the reputation. Warren Spahn sued successfully. They had to burn all the books. Misappropriation is easy. I was going to start a root beer bottling company. I wanted to call it Bruce Springsteen Root Beer, but I couldn't do that without his permission. Oh, real quick. This will be my last slide. How about that? I'll shut up. So, this lady is coming out of the fun house. You people in Hull probably remember some of the fun houses at Paragon Park. I sure remember them. Anyway, this lady was coming out of the fun house wearing her dress. That's her dress up there. That guy's painted on the wall. But she stepped on a button and it makes a loud noise and the wind comes up and her dress went up and there was a photographer there from the county newspaper, took the picture, brought it back. They ran it on the front page. She sued for invasion of privacy. The newspaper said, wait a minute, the photographer was where 75 other people were standing. He had a right to be there. He had a right to photograph whatever he could see. And you can't even see her face. You can't even tell who she is. So how many people would award this lady money for invasion of privacy? Minority. If this is a jury, she's not getting any money. But this was in 1954 in Alabama, and the jury gave her $18,000. The paper said you can't even see who she is. She said, what are you talking about? Those are my 2 boys right behind me, and everybody knows wherever I go, my 2 boys are right behind me. $18,000 in 1954 would be, I don't know how many million today. I said it's my last slide, so why don't I be quiet, and we'll have questions at the end. So you need me me to unplug this.
Next up is Chris Harridan from the Whole Times, and we'll hold off questions till after the presentation,
All right,
and then we'll
just
have a
shut
Q&A
this.
for everybody.
So that's hard to follow, but I'll give it my best. So my part of this presentation is to talk about one piece of what Greg was talking about in the First Amendment is democracy, of course, is upheld or part of it is known well from newspapers and the news. And I'm going to use the term newspapers sort of loosely to encompass all news gathering. We'll talk a little bit about the different types of news gathering organizations, TV and radio. But really what I'm talking about is newspapers because that's what I know about. Mostly, I've worked for small, local, mostly weekly newspapers. We used to say that all the time, you know, how often do you publish? Weekly, very weekly, depending upon how often the bills are paid. But one of the things that, if you noticed in the introduction, I purposely put that in, that there were at one time 3 weekly newspapers in the town of Hull. Hull's a very small town. It's a very active town. But at the time, this was in the mid-1980s, and we're all of the age, we all grew up at the time before the internet. Sometimes when I talk to my son, he thinks that there was no, you know, how did we live without the internet? What did we do? But that was where you found your news. That was where you got your information. So the fact that there were 3, you know, isn't so hard to believe. But one of the things that is happening now is that the local scene and national scene of newspapers, the trends are unmistakable. They're happening in our local towns and they're happening all over the country, that the local news delivery organizations are disappearing. My degree is in journalism. When I graduated in 1992 from New York University, there was actually a newspaper strike going on, so I came back here. But one of the things that you'll see actually in this is, this tells the story of where circulation has gone. This is daily newspaper circulation, but it really, the trend is unmistakable, is everywhere. And I said 1992, if you follow that red line, that was where we were. That was actually the height. And we kind of start to fall, and we thought, oh God, this is terrible. We had no idea how far it was going to fall. But when you look at that, it's amazing to think that that was where we were and what was happening at the time for how this was going to fall apart. We had no idea. So to understand why this is happening, this is one of the questions that we get a lot is, well, what happened to newspapers? Why is the business model no longer working? So there are 3 basic revenue sources for newspapers from time immemorial, from when, you know, when they first started taking on advertising to today. And those 3 were, anyone have any guesses on what those 3 types of advertising were? Okay, subscriptions we'll talk about in a second. Classified, yes, which mostly is help wanted. You know, in 1992, when I was getting out of school, the help wanted section was this thick of the Boston Globe. You spent all afternoon on a Sunday trying to get, you know, figure out where, you know, you were going to apply. Now we're lucky if there are half a page, because where are people going to find jobs? On the internet. The internet. The other 2 categories of ads, what do you think? Display advertising is one of them, yes. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other big one, real estate. Where do you go to find a house now? On the internet. Third one is automotive. Where do you go to buy a car now? The internet. Do you see a theme developing here? So the internet really was the downfall of that business model. And someone had said subscriptions. Subscriptions were not designed because the world of advertising, because that was such a lucrative piece of the puzzle. Subscriptions were where you could play with. There was always the price wars, right? You've heard of the penny press. You've heard of, you know, let's cut the price of the the daily newspaper on the subway only to a quarter, so that someone, just only would take one piece of change to buy the newspaper, because they weren't relying on that. That wasn't part of the subscription, that wasn't part of the revenue model. So when the advertising fell apart, the subscriptions weren't there to pick up the slack. So subscriptions have never been equal, in my view, equal to the cost of what it takes to put out a newspaper. But because the industry never really thought that much advertising would go away. And someone said display ads too. True, very, very true. If you look at some of the old editions of the Boston Globe, Boston Herald, Boston Post, some of the others, huge ads from department stores. Anyone remember Jordan Marsh, Filene's, Raymond's, Grant's, Gilchrist? My dad used to work at Gilchrist. What do those all have in common? They're gone. So those ads are gone as well. So all of this sort of conspired in a way to undercut the basis of newspapers. So what happens when that happens? We lose journalists. So we don't have the money to have as many newspapers and as much circulation. So the number of people working in the industry has gone down. And I'm actually one of these people. Oh, and the other thing, sorry, I meant to start this off. These are not my charts, by the way. I've stolen them all or borrowed them all from the Medill School of Journalism, which does a study every year on the state of local news. And every year it's the most depressing story you ever want to read. But they're chronicling it because there has to be a way to turn it around. And the thing that we need is data to find out where this goes. So those are where a lot of those are from. That's at Northwestern. But if you look, this is, it's a reverse chart, so it goes backwards. Massachusetts is 60%. And I say I'm one of those because, as was mentioned, I used to work in the newspaper industry as my full-time job. I don't anymore. I have another full-time job and work part-time in the news industry because it can't support us. The problem is that the economics have gotten to the point which it's difficult to survive. And in order to have someone who has the experience that required to do this sort of business, to do this sort of thing, sometimes you need someone who is at a different point and is not relying on that as their only industry. And that's not a sustainable model in any stretch. So the number of local newspapers, again, this is a national trend, but it's definitely has the, you can see it in your local area. So 8,891 in 2005 and down to 5,428 in 2025. So over 20 years, lost 3,463 newspapers across the country. It's an amazing number when you look at it. And when I say this is the most depressing thing to ever read, the numbers don't change that much. But what happens when, sorry.
That's not a loss of that's a loss of the newspaper, whether it's online or print. Now a lot of papers are going online.
Yes, these are papers that are closed completely. Yeah. A lot of them, consolidate or go stop printing. But, this is gone. This is totally out of business. So what happens when that occurs? Have you ever heard the term news desert? So this is a chart, again, from Medill that talks about where the concentration of local news is and where it isn't. So the large numbers of papers in the darker areas, so up in New England, we're in a pretty good area. We're in the darker colors, which means we have 2 or more news outlets in our, and this is all by county, that's what the differentiations are. The ones in yellow are none. Now there might be some neighboring county might cover them a little bit, but there's nothing based in there. And that's an important piece. This piece up here might just be the North Woods. There just might be nobody living there. I'm not even sure. But there's a lot of places that have not a lot of coverage. And we are fortunate in our area that we've seen a lot of, we still have papers. Now, we'll talk about what the quality of those papers in just a minute. But this is another, so this was the 2005, I'm sorry, this was the 2005 to 2025. These two charts, I'm going to toggle between them so you can see the difference. This is 2005, number of local newspapers in 2005, and then 2025. So if you see how dark it is in certain areas, and then it's gone away. Again, these are, illustrative, but definitely this is where the trends are. Now, if you look, you can see, these are the population centers, right? The West Coast has got a lot of people. There's not a lot of people living in the middle here. But in these areas, it's gone way down. In Massachusetts, our story is a little bit similar in the sense. This is from 2004 to present, or actually to 2024. There are 48 weekly newspapers that have closed. That's the big yellow. And 2 large dailies that have closed. Those are in the blue. And again, this is divided by county. So this is Plymouth County, right where we are, Bristol, Barnstable, and then Norfolk County is in that area. So we've seen a loss of local news people. And what happens when they go away? We're fortunate in this area, and I say that in someone who's worked in this industry for a long time, and I grew up on the South Shore. I'm pretty familiar with what happens on the South Shore. The Mariner newspapers, we're all familiar with the Mariners, right? I remember when the Mariners actually started by a man named David Cutler, who lived in Marshfield. There was a Mariner in every town, and his thought and his theory was, we're not going to cover another town from a different town. We're going to have a paper within that town, because that's the way you have local news. The Patriot Ledger was a little bit different. They're a regional paper by design. They're designed to, and they were good to read, because in the days when they covered the news a little better, because you were able to find out what was going on in another town. So maybe you were able to compare your school district versus another, what that town meeting did, how this zoning was addressed by a different community. But the Mariners, their focus was very, very specific. They wanted local news in one singular newspaper branded to that town. So there was the Norwell Mariner, Hanover Mariner, Marshfield Mariner, Situate, all up and down the coast, except in Hull. We already had 3. Actually, we didn't have 3 at the time that he did it. But one of the reasons why, and we used to joke about this, and it was a joke and not really a joke, was that we printed our newspaper at the Mariner. So they were guaranteed income from our town no matter what. They didn't need to open there. Now, I don't know that the people who own the Mariner now could find Hull on a map, so maybe that theory isn't so good anymore. But that's one of the reasons why. What happens, though, is you get what's called in the industry now ghost newspapers or zombie newspapers. They still exist in name, but we saw the chart earlier on how many journalists have gone out of the business. They don't work the same way anymore. So this was an example in one of the studies this was 2022, I want to say. The Coastal Mariner. So how many people here are from Norwell? A lot of you? Okay. I think you are within, yes. No, sorry. Situate, Cohasset, and Marshfield became the Coastal Mariner. I live in Hanover now. We became just the Mariner. It's just called the Mariner. And God knows what is in it, because it's not local news. Who subscribe? By the way, I meant to ask this earlier too. Who subscribes to their local newspaper wherever you live? Okay. Who used to? Okay. And I know why you don't anymore. Because of this. So this is an example from December 5th. This is now, they're owned by Gannett, or now they've changed their name to USA Today. Situate and Plymouth, the exact same week, the same story, neither one of them having to do with Situate or Plymouth. So this is what you get. And so if you live in Hull, you don't get any of this, because the goal of our independently owned paper is that we don't look past the Hingham Rotary in a lot of ways. That serves us well in some ways and not so well in others. But this is what we think that, and we've had talks about, should we expand, should we do things, and what should we do? And the thought was really that the strength is also our weakness. Our strength is that we're very well focused. Our weakness is that we're very well focused, and that there's not a lot of opportunity for advertising there. So what we want to look at too, and I'm getting a little bit over my time too. I'm not as fun as some of the examples that Greg had, but where do we find people? There's always this thing in the news business too about we got to get the young people. Got to get those young people, get those college kids. But then you have to think about it. College kids never read the newspaper. I was a nerd. I read the newspaper. Kids don't read the news in the way that we think that they should in order to support newspapers. They never did. When you start to have responsibility, when the news begins to be of interest to you, these are the times that you begin to pay attention. But if you think about what's in your local newspaper, aside from, I'm thinking of high school kids now, sports, school news, news about people that they might know. That's the stuff they're interested in. They're not really interested in the zoning changes that are being proposed up the street, the tax rate that they're not paying, that their parents are, things like that this is the bread and butter of local news. These are the things that people are interested in, the stuff you're not going to get anywhere else. Kids are never interested in that. So I'm not worried so much that kids aren't looking at local news. But you have to have it there in order for them, when they do develop the habit, to be able to read. So one of the things is, where are people looking at local news versus national news? So the local news is the darker purple, national news is the the lighter purple. So multiple times a day, well, that's not unusual that they would look for national. More stuff happens nationally than happens locally. But multiple times a week, the never but number here isn't so bad. This is on, and this was all ages. This is not just kids. So that's okay. People seem to be doing it. They seem to be looking. But where are they going for the news? This is interesting. Of course, phones. We're always looking on our phones. Television was a surprise. A desktop or laptop, that's kind of interesting. But look at print newspaper down here in the lows. And then look at the numbers. The gray bars are never. Never look at the print newspaper. Never look at a tablet. I'm not sure why. I love my tablet. Radio. That's always interesting, because you remember, when was radio invented? 1920-ish, right? That was supposed to kill the newspapers, by the way, in 1920. And then TV was supposed to kill the radio. And then what was going to kill TV? The internet. Well, the internet killed everything. But radio's still around, and it's still up there. This is still the same chart. I'm sorry, no, this is not the same chart. This is a different chart. Sources of local news. Where do they go, though? How do you get there? This is one of our challenges, is because now the news business has changed a little bit, where we don't have the advertising from straight up ads. People aren't coming to us and saying, I want to buy an ad on your website. I wish they did. We're trying to get them interested in doing that. How do you do that? Well, Facebook, Meta, it's called now, Google, they all took over the pay-per-click ads, the type of ads that, when you go onto a site and there's an ad there for something that you maybe have expressed an interest in another search. Those all are there for larger news organizations. A small paper like us, or like the Mariners, we don't have the volume. We don't have the pay-per-click volume to get any value out of that. We just don't. So search engines don't help us on the local news side. But sometimes people will enter, what happened in Norwell yesterday? What was the commotion on Main Street? Online groups or communities. This one is disturbing to me. Who's on Facebook? Who's in the Norwell group? Who's in your town group? What's in there? It's nothing. It's people with uninformed opinions, spouting off on what they think happened. And I don't just mean political. I just mean, what was that big boom I heard? Why are there police sirens, on Main Street? And there's always the comment that says, oh, maybe there's an emergency. Well, of course. This is the type of stuff that you get, and unfortunately, that's what passes for news these days. Content creators on social media. This is an interesting one to me because might be one of the places that could help local news become a little bit more forward, if that's the right word. People do look towards influencers, they call them influencers for, you follow the people, we used to call them the columnists that you like. But now people are looking for what is this person's take on this news? And maybe some of them have something interesting to say. Not a lot of them on local issues, but the fact that people are looking for that is very interesting. Friends and family, well, what do they know? Local radio stations or podcasts. I was surprised that podcasts weren't higher. Because I think podcasts are a very interesting medium for long-form interviews and great ways to get a lot of news out there in a way that's actually can be very interesting. This one was interesting too, digital-only local news websites. That's one of the places that is changing. So what's happened in the news industry is newspapers have gone away, and a lot of places that don't have things like the Mariner, like the zombie newspapers, a lot of them have developed an online-only site. Actually, anyone from Hingham Anchor, Cohasset Anchor, is online only. Nonprofit sites, that one might be profitable, I'm not sure. But a lot of them are nonprofits, so they can they can seek grants, they can solicit donations. This might be another way for, it's a different way of trying to get the same thing out there. It's not a traditional news organization. It's not a traditional business. It's a nonprofit. That's kind of interesting. But a lot of those are digital-only news websites, and there's a lot of them that are happening north of Boston, west of Boston, in some of the suburbs that have lost the tag of newspapers or news sites that we have had. And now here we are down here, local newspapers. But this one is the one that bothers me. This never, I don't like that. Community magazines and university or college media, those are very, very specific sites, very specific areas. So those numbers are not surprising. This is just interesting to look at where people are going for different types of age groups. Interesting that would these be millennials? I'm not even sure anymore. Or what, Gen Z maybe, smartphone. More and more growing on smartphones as we age, which is natural because, number one, the population is aging, but also people are becoming more comfortable with technology, and it's more easy to use in a lot of ways. Radio, still up there. Of course, the older group is there because the habit. You have a habit of listening to it. But again, habits aren't necessarily good business models. This is just on social media. So when we talk about social media, I'm thinking they mean Facebook, because Twitter's really gone away. Instagram doesn't really have a lot of news. Facebook has it. Blue Sky and those types of things haven't really grown to a critical point yet. So I'm thinking that that's where a lot of people are going for their news. It is interesting though that there was a peak here and now it's kind of dropping off a little bit to just sort of sometimes. The people that never went, they've been consistent across the top. The rarely people have been sort of consistent across the top. But the people that are going there often are changing a little bit. Now that could be a function of who they surveyed too. We talked about news influencers a little bit. So why would you go to a news influencer? And this is some of the things that are most important to them, which are helping them understand current events. Well, you have to understand who you're dealing with before you understand if they actually know what they're talking about. But also, the feeling that these people are getting you new information quickly. That's one of the challenges too, because as you have fewer and fewer and fewer people working in journalism, it's harder to get the information out there. We have unprecedented ability to get to people as quickly as we can. In the old days, the not so old days, without television and radio as an aside, you had to print a brand new edition of the newspaper and go out and stand on the street and hold it out. Now we're going into people's homes, onto their phones, into places where they are. So the types of articles, the types of things that are on social media, a lot of it is clickbait. A lot of it is, you won't believe what happened when the select board met last week. And then you click on it and it just says, what they did. Nothing very important. Sorry, Erwin. But, it was, the idea is, because they're making money off the clicks, right? That's what their goal is. If the goal is not informing anymore, it's trying to get, eyeballs on their website. Okay, these next couple of slides are where I may cry, because we're talking about what percentage of the people interviewed. So now think about who's being interviewed here and who's being surveyed. These are people that obviously cared enough to take a survey about local news. So they're not just, the average person on the street, I would assume. These are people that have some interest. Only 15% subscribe to a local news organization. 12% subscribe to a national news organization. Now, the good part, since we're in the Norwell Public Library, is a lot of them may be using the library, which is okay. That's cool. We like that. But when we're looking for funding, and we're looking for revenue, and we're looking for support, we don't have the ads anymore. We've got to find that subscription base somewhere. And this is the one that breaks my heart. That top line. So why would you consider, they asked them, why would you consider paying for local news? And 45% said, I would never do. They wouldn't. That's the number we've got to figure out how to get that number to be lower and the number of people supporting local news to be higher. Because once people have ingrained those habits are going to be broken. Remember when we talked about radio back there? There was the older age group were listening to the radio. That's habit. My kids are in their 20s. They don't listen to the radio. They stream their music. There's a generation, we're about a generation away from radio really losing a lot of audience. But there was that habit. The older generation had the habit. If we lose this habit of understanding that local news is worth paying for, then we really are going to be in even more trouble. Discounts and perks, well, that's always good. Access to local events, that's one of the ways that newspapers and news organizations are trying to make up for the lack of revenue on both sides, on advertising and on subscriptions, holding events, other ways to support the business so you can pay people. We still have to pay a photographer, you still have to pay the layout people, you still have to pay someone to answer the phone, that sort of space, pay someone to fact check, that sort of stuff. Bundled plans or a newsletter, all of these things are ways to try to get more people interested in value from the news. But that number, that 45% number, is really something we have to work on. So, and then this was another one. This was one of the reasons they asked, well, why, if you do support local news, why do you support local news? And it was the number one and number two, supporting local journalism and subscribing and donating is a long-time habit. Great, I love that. But what did we just say? Like, habits are not good business models. Those habits are going to go away. But finding information about specific areas, specific topics. I kept hitting the paywall, so I finally had to subscribe. That's the other thing, if you put your news behind a paywall. And that's one of the things that we've experimented with and we do at the Times is You can go to our website right now and read some of the news, but you don't get it all. You don't get everything because you have to still show some value to those who are subscribing. So that's one of the things. They wanted coupons. People are looking for coupons. I'm not sure what that is. And I cannot recall a specific reason. I'm not sure what that means. So to wrap up a little bit, how do you do it? How do we help? Well, number one is subscribe. This is, don't mean to turn this into a pitch. Subscribe to whomever you think is helping you understand the news, whether that's your local news organization, a newspaper, a person online who might have a Patreon or soliciting donations type of thing, to keep them going, because they need that. They need that support. Be engaged, reading and sharing and discussing the local news so that people understand where that news is coming from. Write a letter to the editor. We'd love that. That's one of the best parts of going into a community. Whenever I drive my wife nuts. Whenever we go anywhere, even if it's a foreign country and I don't speak the language, I pick up the local newspaper. And I just want to see, are people writing letters? What are they doing there? What's going on? And you can always tell a vibrant community when there's a lot of participation in the news, in the newspaper. So how does this really affect our democracy? That's what we're here to talk about. Trust in the media is at an all-time low for all of the reasons that we talked about. People don't feel like they're getting a lot of value from when they get the news that's not relevant to them. And so why would I pay for it if it's not going to be relevant to me? So it's kind of like a vicious circle. We also have some of our high-profile leaders in the country are undercutting trust in the news, which is very difficult, and that trickles down to the local news folks. Fewer watchdogs. That's one of the key roles of the news business, is to keep an eye on government, to keep an eye on what's happening with our tax money. Fewer watchdogs means less barking. We don't know what we don't know because we don't have the journalists there. We don't have the people there investigating and looking into it. People who don't understand the news, or some people who are talking about the news don't understand how it works. Greg and I were talking a little bit about that earlier, about how you can tell when someone doesn't understand the process. And sometimes they may latch on to something that they think is the way it's supposed to work, and it's not really the way it's supposed to work. And it's not helpful. But if we were engaged the way we should be, and with our civic discourse, and with how town meeting works, how our government works, how the legislature works, how the legislature interacts with our Congress, and how it all fits together. That's a role that newspapers used to play on a much larger scale. Government sometimes tries to communicate, to fill that vacuum, but sometimes it's inconsistent, or it doesn't meet people where they are. And I think that there's less pressure then on governments to be held accountable to people. So to look at all of that, the future is bright, I think, if we can figure out a way to support our local news folks and to get those there. But I think that one of the things that we do need to do is to take it upon ourselves to understand that we all have a responsibility to get ourselves supporting, and that's not just the local newspapers around us, but anyone that's providing information that's helpful and is going to help us kind of get out of this mess and figure out what the right way for the news business to sustain itself is. We haven't gotten there yet, but I think we can if we have the support of people who, obviously this room is full of people who are interested. So I thank you for being here, and I thank you for listening, and I'm sure I've gone over time, so I apologize.
So I have a couple of questions that I'm going to start the discussion with, and then we'll open it up as soon as I get their mics turned on. All set? The first one's a throwaway. It's a real easy one. What's the importance of free press in a democracy, and what happens when that is attacked by our leaders?
That was a softball. You want me to hit that one?
Sure, go ahead.
So, well, I think that one of the things that is important is that we as a society have always had the press there as a bulwark against the excesses of government, the excesses of those who would trample on our rights. So when things are happening at a larger level from people whose authority is usually respected or is supposed to be respected, it hurts and it's hard. It's hard to combat that. It's hard to come up with ways around it. And as we just saw the last 20 minutes of what I talked about, the news business is vulnerable and it's kind of kicking it when it's down. So I think it's hard to, it's difficult. It doesn't make it any easier. Government and the news business are not supposed to, be, in harmony so much, but they're not supposed to be so different and so adversarial that they tear each other down. I don't think that helps. Greg may have a better answer to that.
I hate to politicize things, but the current federal administration, to my mind, is attacking the First Amendment press on a daily basis. It's one of the things that NEFAC.org, you can see that we're taking a stance against the federal government interfering in universities, in law firms, in media companies, and the list goes on. And it's informed citizens who guarantee that our democracy continues to be strong. My organization, NEFAC, was putting out a letter the other day trying to solicit funds, and it started off saying that democracy isn't just dying in Washington. And I was like, no, I'm not signing my name to that because I don't believe democracy is dying. I think democracy is under attack. First Amendment is under attack, but I believe our institutions and our people are strong enough that ultimately the pendulum will swing back to where there is a cohesive, intelligent discourse between the government and the citizenry represented by the press.
Thank you. Open up to questions? Yes. Or comments. Doesn't have to be a question.
Hi, so this is a question for Chris. With the exception of Hull, because Hull is a very special place, I'm wondering if there's a correlation. So local newspapers are going down partly because people are just less interested. They're not looking. And I'm wondering if there's a correlation between that and are people just less interested in local in general? Like, are we seeing in New England less people showing up to town meeting, less people running for boards, less people showing up to listen to town board meetings, things of that nature?
I think, well, there have been, I think it goes in waves. I think there are times when there are more. I think maybe one of the problems might be that with a stronger news presence in other communities, there would be a lot more involvement at the beginning. I think what we're seeing in a lot of places now are things are happening and people are reacting to them instead of being involved in them. And what I mean by that is when an override is presented or some type of development project has been working its way through the project, through the process for months, and all of a sudden people are awakened to it. And in the beginning, with a stronger press and with more engaged citizens, that would perhaps have taken it out. It's have happened earlier in the process where there could be some kind of result. But I do think that there is a less, maybe there is a little less interest in it, because I agree with you. I have seen a lot of places where town meeting attendance is way down. Some communities have done away with their quorum, zero quorum. And well, again, Hull's a different place, right? Hull's had a zero quorum for about 30 years. And it was supposed to be the reverse psychology. You don't want a small group of people making the decisions for you, so it ends up that there's a lot of people. But some places have reduced from 150 to 100 or 100 to 75, so that there's more and more attempts to get people involved. I think that's true. I think there is a lessening. And it doesn't help the news business either, because those are the people that would be more interested in the news business too.
Thank you. In the back, we have a question.
Thanks to both of you for great talks. I'll start with one question, maybe come back later with another. On free speech, it seems like every day there are a dozen things that hit us over the head that scare me about free speech. I don't share your optimism, but I hope you're right I would like to share your optimism, and I certainly hope you're right. So even just picking out one small pointer on free speech is so hard in today's context, but I'll try to do that. It seems like a lot of people who are, and this is, I feel like the old man complaining, like Aristotle complaining about the kids today, just don't get it, right? It's that a lot of surveys are showing young college students saying that they don't think free speech should be allowed if it hurts them, if it's offensive to them, if they feel harmed. And that harm word has become so broadly defined. And so you have now free speech under attack from what you would normally consider to be proponents of free speech from a completely different direction than has come before. And that is that I don't want to hear anyone, and I don't want that person here on my campus that is going to say something that offends me or that, again, harms me. I'd be interested in your comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's an important trend to note, and I agree with you that on college campuses today, kids are not, as far as I'm concerned, educated and attuned as they should be to the First Amendment and the right that we have to be offensive. And that's coming down from the highest levels of government and being picked up by universities that are bending the knee, if you will. And it's what my organization aims to do. As I said at the beginning, we educate, advocate, and litigate. And probably of those three, the most important is education. And I'm happy to speak to any organization. I spoke on a college campus in Boston the other day. And of course, the kids that show up, when they hear about the First Amendment, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. But you're right, it's a disturbing trend, and it's one that we need to educate against.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question that kind of talks to the other side of that. I was born in Germany after the war, right after the Nazi time, and I grew up with the Hakenkreuz, the swastika, and Heil Hitler, and all these things. They were totally verboten. It was not allowed. Although free speech, yes, everybody was for free speech. I was demonstrating and whatever. But I never had any problem that those things should not be allowed. And I wonder, why is it here it's possible that somebody can hurt and harm somebody? Like you had this thing with the Ku Klux Klan. They were allowed. They could run around and do all kinds of horrible things. And Elon Musk can say Heil Hitler on public television, or in free everywhere. And that doesn't cross the line where somebody should say, no, you may not say that. And I remember in Germany when I grew up, they were sort of saying, well, maybe if that's forbidden, then those things will go underground and it will be worse. But on the other hand, if somebody knows they do that, they will have to go to jail or something. It has a consequence that stops them from doing it. And if it takes to forbid something like that, I don't know why this shouldn't be forbidden. And I'm totally liberal, you know, I'm a radical. But somewhere there's you know, just like you cannot scream fire in a movie theater. I mean, that's clearly one thing that's not allowed as far as I know.
As I said earlier, the whole topic of my course is where do you draw the line? In Germany today, display of the swastika and Heil Hitler still verboten. But our founding fathers believed in what's called a marketplace of ideas. And when we espouse ideas that are lovely and pleasant to everybody, we don't need the First Amendment. The First Amendment is all about protection for the speech that we hate. And the countermeasure to that kind of speech is not restricting speech, but it's more speech. Truth, the theory of our founding, I hate to say founding fathers. I was listening today where women got the right to vote in this country in 1920, and I think of my grandmothers who didn't have the right to vote even though they were of voting age. But the marketplace of ideas was founded, this country was founded on that idea that truth ultimately will prevail so long as there are people willing to stand up for the truth and not be cowed.
The government, I mean, the administration or, you know, the regime is completely spreading lies all the time. So then truth almost becomes meaningless in a way. I mean, I love the truth, sure, but it's where is it?
As long as there are people willing to stand up and speak the truth, we will have a democracy. But prohibiting speech is not what America is all about. It is protection for the speech that we hate. I don't make that up. That's the title of a book by a Harvard professor many years ago. And it's true. You know, it was Voltaire they give credit to, but some people say he didn't really say it. But what they attribute to him is that I cannot agree with what you say, but I will forever defend to the death your right to say it.
Can I just see if there are other people that have any
Anyone
other
else?
comments before I make a comment?
I enjoyed very much, thank you. I enjoyed very much, yeah, if they can hear me. I enjoyed very much what looked to me like an inside joke that given one of the themes, and you talk about the technology, the effect of technology on consumption and availability of news, that all your graphics had grommets.
Yes.
And I thought it might be a way of easing some of your audience into accepting electronic information, that if it were had grommets and was hung on a wall, it would be okay. We could understand.
We're raising a flag is what we're doing, yes. Putting it up there on the, thank you for noticing. By the way, I appreciate that.
Paula, you gotta-
I'd rather give.
Okay.
Oh, you already. So one of the things that has happened is that journalists have stood up for the truth. And there have been journalists that left the Washington Post, the cartoonists that left the Washington Post. You didn't mention Substack, but right now, quite a number of different people are now publishing on Substack, giving a little bit of free information and then need to subscribe. But I know that what I did for The Contrarian, which is the first journalist that stood up to the Washington Post when Bezos refused to let someone have an opinion piece, a very well-known columnist there. They started their own newspaper, essentially, on Substack. And that, I just wonder how familiar are you with Substack, if that is kind of the wave of the future? I mean, Heather Cox Richardson, I mean, Robert Reich, all these people that are now publishing in kind of these alternative ways for us to get some of the truth and facts.
Well, sure, and I think that's one of the things when we talk about, you know, I kind of was dismissive when I said influencers, but that's really what we're talking about, are those types of people. Professors, former government, high-ranking government officials, also a professor, Robert Reich. But some of these folks who are, would not have had another opportunity or a place to publish, and as Greg said, publish is just speaking, but the ability to get their ideas out there. Substack is a great one because it is a way that if some of the journalists who have left even local news have created their own, we used to call it a blog, right? Now we call it something different. But that I think is also one of the ways that people are doing it, and they're finding support for that. They're finding, there are podcasts. I not to go kind of off track a little bit, but one of the things that I found very interesting, there are podcasters out there, if you listen to them, who ask for Patreon donations and buy me a coffee or some of these things that are ways that people can support them. And there are a couple of podcasters out there who share their results, like how many people have subscribed and at what levels. There are people making some good money. And I think that's a good way, it's a way for individuals perhaps to do it. If there's a way for, a larger organization to do it, maybe that's the way to do it. What's amazing to me is that we're, how many years into this internet experiment, and the news business hasn't figured out the path forward yet, a clear path forward.
And some of the Substacks were like between $30 and $50. It runs, it's people of privilege then can get that information, and that makes it more difficult. Well, I certainly could share with people, but.
I follow both Heather Cox Richardson and Robert Reich on Facebook.
You can do that too.
Great.
Along the lines of experiments, a quick question. Locally, and I forget his name, I'm pretty sure it's a his, not a her. Someone's doing an experiment using AI and basically scraping local town sites for minutes from meetings and all that. Josh Richardson, is that Josh? Oh, Justin, yes.
Yeah.
And just to make it clear, we also subscribe to probably 6 or 8 different newspapers, so I'm not moving away from newspapers. But
We'll find you.
Yes. Well, I don't live in Hull, but or else I would subscribe to that one too. But I have to admit that the AI, the summaries that you get are really quite useful, and as opposed to going through the minutes from the town meeting, the selectmen meeting, and all that, which. And I just wondered, what your comment or thoughts are on that use of AI and all that.
So that is interesting. One of the things that that is probably the best use of AI I've seen in local news is taking, if you're not familiar with it, what they basically do is they take a broadcast recording of a meeting, and the AI note taker will basically create a transcript of it, and then from the transcript they'll create a summary. I've actually also seen them do podcasts too, which is kind of, it's actually very interesting to listen to. What's interesting though is that I still have that part of me that someone has to check it a little bit. So there is a little bit of, I think there is a little bit of vetting or a little bit of editing that has to go to it, but that is one way of doing it a little more, how is AI going to help us? It's doing it a little bit more efficiently. It's not something that I think that in Hull we haven't done that. We still kind of like the idea of eyes on the news, and also interpreting what that is. I've been in situations in places I've worked where I've been sitting in a meeting like this, and I heard somebody say something and reported it that way, and the person next to me heard the exact same thing, reported it that way. And the person said they didn't say it, and we listened to the tape, and you know what? They didn't say it. We were both wrong. So I think there's some refinements that need to be made, but it is one good way to do it.
I wanted to follow up on something that came up about truth and the First Amendment, and we see a lot now. Is there a code of ethics that journalists and reporters have to follow, where they actually report facts and the truth if they're reporting something as news, does it have to be accurate?
One of my slides we didn't get to is the code of ethics of the Society for Professional Journalists.
That's right.
Have a code of ethics. No, I said earlier, there are only 4 defenses to a defamation action. And the number 1 defense is truth. As I said earlier, I speak to newsrooms, broadcast news people, and I just tell them, there are certain red flag words. If you're saying someone committed a crime, or they're guilty of sexual misconduct, or they aren't performing their government job in a way that they should, check your facts. Make sure, get the other side of the story. You know, get their quote. But yeah, that's what a good journalist does. Searches for the truth and make sure that their sources are verifiable and accurate. There's 2 slides. This one is, actually there's a couple. These are just organizations that you may be interested in. NEFAC, New England First Amendment Coalition. I told you before, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And the lobeschool.org is another school that I teach at. But this slide, I like to end with. One of my heroes, William O. Douglas, a now deceased Supreme Court Justice, tells us that even though things might not seem to be changing in terms of oppression by the government, be aware that when those slight changes happen, we have to address them. Otherwise, we may become unwitting victims of the darkness. My last slide is glad to receive any communications from any of you at any time about the First Amendment, defamation, privacy, right to know what the government is up to, or the Boston Bruins. I'm a diehard Bruins fan.
Hi, I have a follow-up question, comment on what you brought up, which was very good, I think. And your response that truth, we need to people need to stand up and go for the truth and want the truth and show that the truth is going to change things or make a difference. And it doesn't, at least at this point, it doesn't seem there are a lot of people standing up for the truth, and it doesn't seem to make a difference, although your last slide with William Douglas, but it just is discouraging.
You know, I have one word in response to that, and it's courts. It is our court system, federal, state, local, that where there's a saying, I hope I can say it correctly, actually Justice William Young wrote a decision this month, I believe, maybe late October, talking about ICE detaining people without due process. And he said, it's an amazing decision. It starts off, no one's ever seen anything like it. He started the decision above the caption with an anonymous note he had received. And it said, Trump has tanks and guns, what do you have? Something like that, I'm paraphrasing. And he wrote his decision, it's I think 61 pages. And at the end he said, and he scribbled it like the fellow did. He said, P.S., thank you for your note. It shows that you care. I invite you to stop in this courthouse or any courthouse in the country, because where there is a jury of 12 people, there is the light of liberty. And it's a tremendous decision, really condemning a lot of the conduct of the federal government right now. And so as long as there are people willing to serve on juries, people willing to work in government service, and people who care, I am optimistic that ultimately truth will prevail.
I'd like to thank our two panelists. If you want to